All right, guys, in today's video, we're gonna talk about how to educate your hands to build a better golf swing. And there's really a couple of key points I want you to take home here right away in the beginning, and then we'll talk through some of how do I educate my hands, why is this important, and what do we need to do here. I'm gonna show you some examples. A couple of key things. Number one is, as I've been coaching, for the past 15 plus years, I've never, ever met a really good ball striker who didn't have really good hands and know how to use their hands to be able to hit shots and manipulate ball flights. That's part number one. Number two is, if you can learn how to educate your hands, and I'll explain what that means in a second, it's really easy to then add the body motions that you want to have in your swing after. That can go in both ways. Sometimes you can learn body motions first and then learn how to educate your hands second. I'd be open to that debate and conversation. But I've had a lot of players I work with that have worked very successfully where you learn how to use your hands first. Tiger Woods talks about it all the time. He uses his hands to feel ball flights, right? I think it's a really good thing to develop. And then you can learn how to do some of the macro and micro body motions after. Now, when I talk about educating your hands, it doesn't really matter whether you use your lead hand or trail hand, and we'll talk through both. Before I show you an example, educating your hands to me, what you're going to see in the video here, means learning how to take your lead wrist and work it into what we call flexion or bowing. And that would be defined by your wrist. Let's say your forearm here is in front of where your wrist or your hand is at. So here's flat in the same condition. Here's a bowing motion, right? So the wrist bone stays ahead of the knuckles. Wrist bone stays ahead of the knuckles. That's part number one. And in with that motion, as you learn how to do this, which I'll show you how to do, you want to add a little bit of arm rotation, which we call supination or palm up. So a little bit of wrist flexion, a little bit of arm rotation. Before I show you how to do that, let me just show you some examples of really good ball strikers doing this to give you a better visual.
Okay, so here's a few examples. You can see the lead wrist flexing and supinating. Here's John Rahm. And where you could really see this through the hit is how, notice that the wrist bone, right about here, is more towards the target than the knuckle. So if we drew a line down the forearm, see that would be ahead of where the wrist is. That wrist is back in flexion, right? That's that flexing or bowing piece. And then you'll notice the supination by watching the glove logo. Notice the glove logo points towards us right here, and then it's going to gradually point behind him to the left through impact. It's about 180 degrees of rotation. So the flexing is the wrist bone ahead of the knuckles, and the supinating is the glove logo working from towards us to behind us. A couple other of good examples. One here is Tony Finau. So if we get Tony Finau here through impact, we're going to see the same sort of movement with the lead wrist. We're going to see the knuckles, right, the wrist bone ahead of the knuckles. See the wrist is in flexion there. So here's the forearm. The wrist is still behind that. And watch the glove logo pointed towards us, and then through impact, it's going to be gradually pointing to the left behind him. So there's that motion there, right? There's that wrist flexing and supinating through impact. Last example here, Colin Morikawa, also a really good example. If we look at him on the left here, we see the same sort of motion. The wrist is bowing or flexing at impact. So see, me really exaggerate. See, here's the forearm, there's the wrist. So very, very flexed. And again, the glove logo pointed towards us to pointed behind him to the left. So they're flexing the wrist and supinating.
Okay, so as we saw there with those players, a couple of key movements, and we're going to talk about how to train this. We could see there, obviously, now when they work through impact, how once they get through impact, the arm's in front of the wrist, right? That's that wrist flexion. And you can see the glove logo from about the time the shaft is parallel to the ground, it's pointing straight away from them, to by the time it's parallel to the ground on the way through, it's pointed straight behind them. So that is, for some of the math people out there, that's 180 degrees of rotation in a very short period of time. Now, learning how to do this wrist flexion and supination, what that actually does to the club itself is it de-lofts it. It takes loft off, right? So it would turn my 8-iron into a 7-iron, helps me hit the ball more solid, farther. It also helps close the club face to the path, getting the toe more in front of the heel. So if you're someone who hits the ball not solid, not far, misses to the right at all for a right-handed golfer, you would want to do these things the most. If you're someone who already misses to the left, maybe you do them a little less, or we talk about how to get the body motion. So here's the feel. I want you to hold your lead hand out in front of you and sort of almost make a little plastic gun motion. You don't have to have the other finger here, but definitely have like the hitchhiker thumb out. I like to have a finger or two down just to help me feel it. So what I want you to feel when you start, the thumb points straight at the golf ball, the glove logo's towards the target, and my wrist and forearm are in one line. Now I just want you to slowly take your lead hand back to your trail leg, and as you move it to your lead leg, start to feel the top of your wrist get closer to the target than your knuckles and your fingers. See that motion right there? See how the top of my wrist is closer to the target than my thumb and my finger. That's my wrist working into flexion. Now I just want you to feel it right here down by impact to start with, then we'll gradually make bigger swings. So here's the motion you're doing first. Almost if there's a wall here, get the top of your wrist to be able to hit that wall. See how my knuckles are curled under. Now if I took the club with that, what that does is de-loft and close the club face. That's exactly what you want to learn. Once you put the body pivot in with it, that neutralizes it. Now if you don't like using your lead hand, you can use your trail hand. If my hands are connected to the club, if my lead hand were to work like this, wrist in front, knuckles under, my trail hand would look like what? The exact opposite, right? So it's still the same piece as my wrist bones are ahead of my knuckle. That could be an easy cue for you. Wrist bones, ahead of knuckle. No idea what the name of those bones are, but we'll say wrist bones, knuckles. This is the motion here. Now, as we saw with them, it's not just that motion. My glove logo doesn't stay where it's pointed. There's rotation or arm rotation, right? So as we're doing those wrist motions, wrist bone ahead of the knuckle, I'm also going to add a little bit of arm rotation. So take this back out here in front again with the hitchhiker thumb. As I go back to my right leg, that thumb would point about up and behind me. As I work through the ball, I'm going to have it point more straight towards the target. So kind of straight away from the target. As I'm adding this wrist flexing in, straight towards the target. Straight away, straight towards. Now if I had my right hand in there, it's the same motion. Straight away, straight towards it, right? If I take this out of here, I'm feeling the wrists ahead of the knuckles, but I'm adding in a little bit of that arm rotation. So the back of my left hand points back behind me and my right palm points back behind me. And again, de-lofting the club, solidness of contact, compression, face that's closed to the path, all those good things. So when we start to hit with these, what I want you to be able to do and what I like to start here with is just hip high, hip high. So I'm gonna hit 8 irons, maybe 100 to 120 yards. Because I'm gonna really exaggerate these wrist angles here, the ball should come off lower than normal, and if anything, have a little bit of left curve to it, or more left curve relative to your normal. So if you're someone who curves it way to the right, you need to ratchet the volume up here and do a lot of this. If you're someone who hits it pretty straight, you probably don't have to do as much of that, but you still feel the flexing piece. So we're gonna go hip high, wrists in front of knuckles, a little bit of arm rotation. Wrist in front of knuckles, a little bit of arm rotation. Now notice as I'm doing this, I do have some body motion going with it. I'm not consciously doing that yet, but you're gonna notice there's a little bit of turning. So it's the same thing. I hit that 8 iron, probably 120 yards, a little bit lower than my normal, curved about 10 yards to the left, very solid. You're gonna probably notice as you're practicing this, wow, I'm able to get my 8 iron to go like my normal distance with a much shorter swing. Why would that be possible? How are you able to do this? Because you're hitting it really solid, taking loft off. Why would you want to do that? We would all take more distance, right? If you go play now and you hit your 8 iron, how far do you hit it? Let's say 150. Would you rather hit it 170? Absolutely, right? If you can keep the same accuracy, we'll take the 170. And solid, right? So same thing, hip high, feeling the knuckles ahead, or the wrists ahead of the knuckles with a little bit of that arm rotation. I really like to feel with my lead hand, the back of the wrist is more towards the target with a little bit of arm rotation. The more arm rotation you do, the more left it's going to curve. The less arm rotation, the less. So you got to use your own judgment there. So there's the same thing, really solid compressed shot, slight pull draw, lower than normal. That's exactly what I want. I can always dial that back as I go longer. Now, again, if you don't like that lead hand, feel that trail wrist staying bent back. Wrist closer to the target of the knuckles, and feel a little bit of this forearm, little wax on, wax off. With the forearm motion gives you the same exact thing. Once I could do some hip high, I would go kind of shoulder high. Now this is the point, or kind of arms parallel. I bet some of you watching will do this and you'll hit the ball as far with this sort of like 3/4 swing as your normal, be a little bit lower and feel really, really solid. Same feels. So there's a lower trajectory than normal, probably, honestly, not a lot of curve, maybe a 3 or 4 yard draw, okay? So if you do this and you hit the ball really solid and straight, Should you keep doing it? Absolutely. Do you need to do more of the thing? Probably not. It's probably pretty good for you then, right? If it's going weak and to the right, do more of it. Again, notice my body's reacting to my hand. Same feels, same little hitchhiker. And you should be doing this riding in a cart or playing with someone, right? Feel the wrist go towards the target. My arm's separating from my body. Boom. And then just add a little bit of arm rotation. You could do this all day, never get too good at this. As I'm doing this, then I have a little bit of belt buckle towards the target. A little bit of body motion, right? Let's put back up some of those guys doing that through impact, right? See that? That's the visual that you're trying to recreate. John Rahm, Colin Morikawa, Tony Finau, all very good ball strikers. Same thing, I mean, I couldn't hit it as solid. Now that one I know I did a little bit more. It's probably a 20-foot pull draw to the left. And again, I can tweak some variables as I go, but if you're like me, the number one thing you're looking for is I want to hit the ball solid day in and day out, hit the ball solid, hit the ball solid. You can use this as a go-to swing when you go play, right? Hit the ball solid. Now, how much you do some of this does depend on what kind of grip you have. The weaker your lead hand grip, the more it's turned counterclockwise at setup, the easier this is going to be. If you have a super strong grip, you're probably not really going to do as much, but let's just assume you have a neutral grip here. We'll do one more 3/4 swing. Yeah, and those are all very solid. So not only, like I said in the beginning, every good player, really good ball striker I've ever worked with, can manipulate things with their hands. That's a good thing, not a bad thing. When you hear really good players talk about, they're getting handsy and stuff, that's because they're able to do it. Like that's part of, like you hear Tiger talk about saving it. Well, you'd rather be able to save it than not save it, and then build the other parts of your swing around that. And if you can get these parts really good, get the wrist flexing and the supinating, again, you can build other pieces and body motions. Notice my body's still turning towards the target. I'm still doing everything else. I can think about my hands and still play really good golf. But also, the reality is, the better you are with your hand motion, the less you have to have other things really perfect. And I know some of you don't like to hear that. I want a perfect swing, so do you, I get it, we'll build it in, but heck, I want to hit it good all the time, no matter what I'm doing. So I would highly suggest that you, this year as you're going, just spend a little time with your warm-up. Do a little bit of that hitchhiker, wrist flex and arm rotate. Feel your lead hand. Eric, I don't like that. Okay, try your trail hand. Start hip high, hit little low kind of pull draws. Slowly add length to the swing, slowly add the body motion. I bet if you learn how to educate your hands, that will be the key to building a better golf swing. I don't think I've ever worked with someone who got good at this, that we didn't build a really good golf swing around. I hope the same for you this next year. If you have any questions on this stuff, leave a comment down below. If you think this would help somebody, share it to others, click the like button. All that stuff really helps our channel, really supports us. And as always, I appreciate you guys watching.